morning, good afternoon, good evening, anyone watching now or listening later to the audio podcast version of the conversation. It is a pleasure to be joined today by Michael Leonard. Michael, how are you?
I'm well, Jose. Thanks for having me on your show.
No. It's an absolute pleasure. We were talking before going live about spending more time online or talking to people online more than in the real world. And a few episodes back, I was discussing mental health with Dr. Goodwin, a psychiatrist and also fantasy author. And at least it made me feel a little bit better that he said that, barring having, sitting down with someone across a table, this is a very good second best option for, us as humans to interact and communicate. So that made me feel a little bit better.
Listen, I can't get enough of rationalization either. So let's just pat ourselves on this back on this virtual sterile world that we're living in, and we'll go from there. But no, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. It's nice actually because as a result of this book, I've gotten to do a lot of podcasts. So it's just amazing the people you meet, and you really do feel like you have a connection when you actually have to Zoom with someone who wants to, talk about their fiction that they love and their different philosophies on things. So it's been a real pleasure and I wouldn't trade it for the world. And it really is a blessing that Zoom and all of this is so easily enabled. I'm old enough to remember when this was like the far-fetched science fiction that you could just have simultaneous full duplex video conversations with other people. And here we are living to see the day.
That's right. It was this type of movies. Well, we got Steve here in the chat. He's already picked up your book from when you were at Nicholas Cotter's show. He hasn't finished it yet, though.
Oh, that's great. I don't know that. I think Nicholas did a live stream. I don't think it's up yet, but that's awesome, Stephen. Thanks for joining us in two places. I'm glad you have picked up the book, and I think the ending is something that a lot of people really enjoy. So it does come all together. So stick with it, and I think you'll have a lot to say.
Um, Usually I start these conversations. I like to get to know people a little bit as well and hear their stories.
Sure.
Although I've been criticized for that. People have said, I just want to hear about the book. I don't want to know about. But anyway, so because you've traveled around a little bit as well yourself, haven't you?
I have, yeah. So I'm from Boston. That's where I grew up. That's actually where I went to college. I went to Boston College, which is a private Catholic school. It started as like a not particularly famous place, and then it got much more famous nationally because of sports. So, but all that to say is, I kind of fit the definition of townie. I grew up in one place and then went to college a few miles down the road. But after college, I did some legal work, but then I started working as a China consultant. Essentially, I was a business advisor that helped companies that wanted to enter the Chinese market. That was pretty much my focus. So I went from this very local, hadn't really traveled all that much around the world to getting on an airplane like it was an elevator. And besides Boston, the city I've spent the most time in my life is Beijing. So that just kind of began the journey. My wife's foreign. I just became a lot more cosmopolitan, but I still am kind of a townie. So I'm this weird mixture.
So how does that happen from Boston to Beijing? How did that Chinese connection come along?
So I graduated college, and in the United States, you go to law school for 3 years to become a
Mm,
lawyer. So my
mhm.
brother went straight from undergrad into law school, like no gap in between. And he was a law student when I graduated from college. And like a lot of liberal arts majors, I just kind of assumed I had to become a lawyer. It was like I had a history degree, undergrad. What does that prepare you for? Your professors will say, like, we teach you how to think and read sources and write, but like I I think that's true in hindsight, but at the same time, as a 22-year-old, I was like, okay, so now what do I do? And everyone was kind of like, you go to law school and you become a lawyer on the other end. So I kind of was just on that conveyor belt. But I asked my brother, and he said, maybe you should try working in a law firm first to see if you want, because the law school sounded fine, like more school. That's okay,
Mm.
I can do that. But the profession of being a lawyer, frankly, was very abstract. I don't come from a family of lawyers or anything, and if you're going to consign yourself to a lifetime of a thing, you might want to see the thing a little bit before you in America take on a large amount of debt to go to get a law
Yeah.
degree. And
Mhm.
so I did that, and it was an amazing opportunity. I was a corporate law paralegal, which if you had to tell me at like 20 would have been that would have sounded like a punishment for some terrible crime I committed. But what it was really interesting is I there was this whole universe of like how businesses deal with one another that I hadn't even thought of. I mean, I'm coming at it from the legal angle, but basically when a company wants to form, when they want to buy another company, when they want to sell something, when they want to have like a board meeting, like you've probably heard the term board meeting, but like how does that actually occur? I had to get involved with all of that stuff. And it was really fascinating. It opened my eyes, but it made me certain that I did not want to be an attorney. I was kind of like, oh no, I don't want a lifetime of this. And that definitely means I shouldn't spend 3 years and a lot of money studying to do this profession. So then the big question was, now what? And one of our clients was basically a Bostonian who just kind of went east in the early 2000s. He just kind of saw business deals. And I mean, he was when he was working for us, he was working on a toll road through Inner Mongolia,
Mm.
which from the sounds of it is a province of China that borders Mongolia. And, they needed a toll road. So that's the project he was working on. So I'm trying to figure out my next career. I've got this client doing this really cool adventurism. On top of that, the financial and the economy in the United States has collapsed. And the story in 2008, 2009 is, well, look at China. They have it all figured out. I would not echo that story in 2025, but that's what it looked like. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to be a lawyer. I might as well just go to China. So I called up the client and said, I'm not going to continue as this paralegal. The idea was that you're a paralegal and then you ultimately go to law school. It's kind of like a training program, more or less. And so when I admitted to my bosses and myself that I wasn't going to be a lawyer, I told him, and he said, all right, well, you know my business backwards and forwards, so come work for me. And that's how it started.
Mm. So it's a case of serendipity almost to these things, isn't it?
A little bit of megalomania, insanity, but the typical things you expect from a 22-year-old man. I think I was 24 when I started that job, but more or less the same thing. I thought it was Indiana Jones. Go do some adventuring.
I think also at that age, you just don't know any better. We think we do at the time, but we don't know any better. It's the same thing for me when I finished university, moved to London. Just moved to London to work in finance because that's, yes, I can. And I arrived in 2003 in the city of London. And then from there, I think 2.5 years into the job, it's like, hey, we're going to send you to the Amsterdam office. It's like, okay, yeah, sure, I'll go.
Yeah.
And don't know any better. Yeah. And then
It's really great. Wouldn't you say, Jose, like there is something about being a man in your 20s before wife and child, and there really is no obligation. I mean, I feel really fortunate to have had. So I worked that job in China for 9 years. So from 2009 till about 2018.
mhm.
And I'm like, I just turned 40 and I have a wife and two small children right now. And it's just like going into my latter half of my life, the fact that I kind of adventured and saw the world, like I'm a bit more of a homebody. I have a lot more kind of comfort with the place that I am, but I
Yeah.
was a restless guy in my 20s. And it was really cool to kind of just turn that up to 11 and let that story play itself out. I think that's a pretty common experience, but I'm glad I have friends who didn't do that. And now they're 40 and they're starting to get a little bit itchy feet. And it's like, well, you have a wife and kids now. So maybe you
I,
missed your boat.
I mean, it's not necessarily for everyone.
True.
I've got childhood friends who, have stayed local to from where we grew up in the south of Spain. They are content that their daughter goes to the school that they went to, and they are genuinely happy just carrying on in that circle. I guess that the feeling of comfort and familiarity is very fulfilling for them. That it's not for me, but it's certainly for them, and I can see them, and they always seem happy and okay and content with life. I still got that little bit of itchiness. I still think that before my kids are too old, I could still travel abroad and move somewhere else for another number of years
Mm.
before finally settling in. But anyway, so at some point, and in my ample experience talking to authors, the writing must have been part of you as you were doing all these things.
Not entirely. So in college, I wrote screenplays. I actually did it for coursework. We had a class called screenwriting. And I ended up taking all of the classes on screenwriting. As part of my degree in history, I
Yeah.
was able to take all these kind of random electives, and I enjoyed the screenwriting one the most of any. So I always had this creative side that I wanted to indulge, but I came from a family or just a background where it's like other people get to do that. That's not very sensible. Like, do something sensible. So I've been kind of a repressed creative for all those years. So I go from law to business, and then I actually went to MIT for business school. So I'm doing all these things that are very sensible. And it wasn't until after business school that the whole time it's in the back of my head. It's like, if I ever won the lottery or had a giant business success, I shall finally indulge this creative energy that has always been there. I don't have the story, which I wish I did, which is, I was always writing, I was journaling, I was doing all these things during that period till I finally took it to the next level. I just kind of walked around as a repressed creative. But luckily I was able to finally I had the opportunity to be able to kind of lean into it. And now I can't see any other way forward. So I think there's a lot of people walking around like that. That's my kind of observation as I talk to them. A lot of my business colleagues have opened up to me because we always ever spoke on professional terms or business terms. And the amount of people that are interested in creative expression, whether it's a book or some other avenue, is really high. It's like, I just assumed most people didn't care about that sort of thing, but there's actually a lot of repressed creatives walking around, but it takes a lot of gumption sometimes to make a switch in that direction.
Yeah, the thing is that the more I talk to traditionally published authors and indie authors, and particularly agents, I had a conversation with ex-Orbit publisher, now literary agent, John Jarrell, a couple of weeks ago, and he said that 99.9999% of authors don't make a living from being an author. They all got day jobs, and writing is just something that they do on the side. And every now and then the book gets published and they get some nice money out of it, but they don't make enough to make a living from purely writing. So I don't know about repressed creativity, but it's just that it's a very low return endeavor, I should say. So
That's true.
low risk, low reward.
Yes, that's a good point. But you kind of selected for the categories of writers, which is interesting because I guess I'm going previous to that barrier. The amount of people I encounter who say, I think beyond in passing, because you have a lot of people say, I'd like to write a book, but if you really double click, they actually do. But even the barrier of just writing it and not making a living from it, they're not willing to put it down on paper. And I had a lot of those same kind of hangups myself. I think there's a lot of fear of failure. There's a lot of where do I start? So you just kind of get overwhelmed and just neglect the whole thing. I guess I'm calling those people repressed creatives, but I did talk to, I know you had on your show, Christopher Rocchio. He was on one of your panels. And so Christopher and I have become friends. He's blurbed my book. And we were having a conversation recently where I was discussing with him, because he has made a living, obviously, of his stories. And I was asking him, I said, Christopher, I don't think I can do anything else now. I think I'm ruined for other activities. And I'm in a fortunate position where I can do that. If it came down to it, I would go shovel ditches to feed my family. But I can't imagine never writing again. And he was talking, he's like, yeah, there's literally nothing else in my life I could do. So there are a certain number of writers that are just going to do this no matter what. But there's so many more people who just, I don't know, they can't take the leap. There's some sort of abstract barrier that prevents people from expressing themselves creatively. And I'm sure some people just aren't creative and don't have any desire. But I'm increasingly encountering people who do have the desire, but they can't even take so much as the first step forward to try to indulge it.
I don't know. So this whole podcast YouTube channel thing has been a massive journey for me, because I was totally oblivious to the world of independent authors. And in my ignorant mind from 2-3 years ago, to me, an indie author was someone that just wasn't that good or good enough at getting a publishing deal. But the more I talk to people, the more I've read indie authors, no, the quality is there. It's just that there's a lot of people writing, and every day there's a few less readers, so it's very complicated to make it.
Oh yeah, it's a tough industry, and you're competing against the entire backlist of human creativity that's ever been invented. You know, if you look at the Nielsen charts for I'm in sci-fi, like if you look at their weekly sales charts, which you have to pay to access it, but I've like had publishers or other authors send me kind of snippets. They subscribe to that enterprise database, and it's like Dune, Three Body Problem, Ender's Game. Like you're competing against the great works that are just constantly in the top 50. In fact, breaking into the top 50 is an extraordinary accomplishment for just the weekly sales at any given point. And so, yeah, you've got millions of books coming out in a year. You've between indie and traditional, you've got the entire backlist, and you have fewer readers. It's a tough world out there, but I guess the motivated keep striving. We do have growth in audio. Intellectual property has never been more valuable in the history of humankind.
Yeah.
So that's a mixed story.
Here's my last gloomy thought before we start talking about
nice. Is it sunny there in Spain, or are you guys having like an uncharacteristic rainy period?
No. I live right on the Mediterranean, so here it never gets below zero. It never snows here. It's
I've got the Boston gloom, yet Jose's got the gloomy questions.
Yeah, okay. Well,
I guess that sunshine's not getting in the window. That's okay. Trust me, I'm here for it.
It's all right. No, because here's a thought. Say, for whatever the reason, we can talk about aliens, and aliens come and they zap our minds with some kind of Reagan thing, and they kill creativity. There are enough books in the world where you could just spend your life reading great stories, and we wouldn't necessarily miss on any new stories that haven't been written yet.
It's true.
Sorry.
Is that a question or no? Because it's 100% true. That observation is a fact. So why do we continue to create?
Obviously, we continue to create because we are human. That's part of what we do.
Yeah.
But like you said, if someone asks you, "Oh, I want to get into sci-fi reading, where should I start?" It's very unlikely that we're going to recommend a brand new book that came out this year. You're going to go back to, start here, Dune, start with Philip K. Dick, start with, same as with fantasy.
Yep.
Start with
Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings, and it doesn't mean we have to read it in order of publication, but yeah, you're fighting against the long-standing established authors.
Yeah. Maybe this is one of the hurdles that prevent all these repressed creatives, at least in my terminology, from even beginning. I mean, the creative process in and of itself is worthwhile to the individual, regardless of kind of the positive feedback loop. That's cliche to say, because it's just like, write for yourself. It doesn't matter if it finds one reader, that's great. I mean, I come from a business background. I believe in the scoreboard of sales and money, and not just because I'm, greedy or I, roll around in a money bin like Scrooge McDuck. It's because there is like a voting mechanism to determine the quality of thoughts, the quality of creative output. It's not perfect. There's a lot of stuff that doesn't get the attention and the money it does deserve. And there's a lot of stuff that gets a lot of undeserved attention and money, obviously. But the creative work, I mean, it's true to say that the creative work does something profound to the person involved. And I just think it is endemic to us as beings. Interestingly, I was talking to Christopher Rocky about this as well. I mean, my novel is about Catholic aliens showing up on Earth. And, instead of the classic, the aliens land at the White House and say, take me to your leader, they land at the Vatican and say, we want an audience with the Pope. So, the God part does come in, because are these aliens genuine, like believers in God? That doesn't make sense. Like, is this a big ruse? Like, what could be their motivations? What is going on? That's kind of what the story kind of takes a spin for the First Contact kind of medium for. And, but I was talking to Christopher, who is Catholic, and I am as well, just full disclosure. But there's a lot of theologians who've likened, it's an analogy, so bear this in mind, God to the author of the universe, the author. And just like creation, it's not, at least in Christian terms, creation isn't something that happens once at the beginning of time, like the winder of the clock who just turns it on and lets the clock unwind, but it's kind of a permanent, kind of constantly happening thing. And so I think like when you create a book, you're kind of doing the creation of all reality in a small format. I created a whole new alternate reality that is the story that I tell in the universe that exists in. Now it's way less, ornate and wide as the one that we live in, but that's what we go to experience when we go into a work of fiction, is to experience this reality that some other person has just generated kind of from nothing, like ex nihilo, so to speak. And that process for the person doing it, like the author, can be a thrill that is unmatched by anything else. And that's what I was talking to Christopher about. I was like, it's the power of God to write a book. I mean, it's some like sort of fraction, and I'm just hooked. I'm hooked on the drug. So you're right. It's kind of a long defeat. We've got the entire backlist. We've got all these books that come out. You've got fewer readers with shorter attention span, but the endeavor of writing it is, it can be a drug that some people just can't give it up.
I just think it's part of human nature, in the same way that people exercise or take they may not necessarily be a professional sportsman, but they take it to a high level as a hobby, whether it's running, whether it's weightlifting, whether it's playing any team sport, isn't it? I think they are aspects of our humanity. And I think if we managed somehow to balance your job, your wife, your kids, your writing, that would be the sort of nirvana that we should all be aiming for. Is complicated. There's a lot of plates in the air.
Yeah, there is. And but luckily we keep doing it. And so, like a lot of authors, I wrote my book essentially just because I was kind of very annoyed and upset as a sci-fi fan that something like my book didn't exist. I always thought why isn't there a subgenre from the 50s that has been like kind of played out like Twilight Zone episodes of aliens come to Earth because they're Jewish, aliens come to Earth because they're Muslim, aliens come to Earth because they're Hindu, aliens come to Earth to disprove specifically this one religion, aliens come to Earth and so shockingly there is very little in the sci-fi canon that addresses Earth religions directly. Now there are some exceptions to this rule, and I love to talk about them, and it's really interesting. But it's been weirdly, for historically contingent reasons, something that most of sci-fi has avoided. And as a reader, I just thought that would have been really interesting for someone to address head on, probably in reaction to my consumption of the 3-body problem. But like a lot of things, as much as has been created out there, there are still so many holes in the creative output that are really interesting to fill in. And sometimes those find purchase with a lot of people, and sometimes they don't. I've had some pretty good success with this debut so far, so it's been good.
So what was the aim of writing this book? Not just for yourself, but what was the concept that you wanted to put across here?
The motivations for first contact stories. Let's just take the classic. Aliens show up in the sky above planet Earth. You could think Independence Day. You could think Close Encounters of the Third Kind. You could think E.T. even, if you want to go like in that direction. But that classic trope that even people who are not sci-fi fans are familiar with. This is pretty much mainstream fiction. I've always thought as a sci-fi fan that the motives for the aliens coming here were really lame. They generally were something that, the story's interesting because these aliens show up and what does humanity do? We don't want to scrutinize the plot hole of why they bother coming to Earth so much. And as a sci-fi fan, that did kind of bother me that no one's really attempted, in my view, to really try to put something together that's a lot more ironclad. And so that was partly the motive for this book. It's very much a kind of rebuke to the sci-fi kind of first contact stories of most of the reasons the aliens are here are really bad reasons. And we can suspend our disbelief and go on, because Arrival is a really cool movie. Arrival is really cool. I know it's based on the short story, The Story of Your Life, but the motive for the aliens coming is, I think, a little convoluted and silly. And Independence Day is even more laughable. They're here for our resources. Like what's resources? Like human resources at the corporation. And I'm happy. I know that's a hot take. I'm happy to defend it, Jose. So
no. But I would no, because I was just thinking, the reason is just because they can. If we're getting closer to, we've landed on the moon. We're trying to get to Mars. In some distant future, we will be the aliens that make contact with some other life forms somewhere out there in the galaxy. And if they ask themselves, what's the reason for these people that walk on two legs and have got hair at the top to come to make contact, the answer would be because we can, because we were curious. There would be no ulterior reason possibly for us to travel space, right?
You make a great point. And that I'll tell you why that's not real well represented in the canon, because it generally isn't what you're describing. Like in Childhood's End, they're here because essentially mankind has to transcend to a more they evolve into like a greater form, and they're here to usher humanity out of its childhood. The reason so you're right. The best reason aliens will come here is actually a trite reason. They wanted to. They just wanted to. The problem is that doesn't set up a conflict for a narrative generally. If the story is aliens show up and then they're here, there's real, and then what? It's like, well, they're here. I don't know. And so you have like District 9, which is great because the aliens kind of show up and no one really knows why. And then they're here and then there's some sort of conflict, but there's usually something for the humans to solve, to kind of fix for the aliens, either to get rid of them or to assuage them. That's why, I mean, unless you can think of an example, I'm not really aware of a lot. It's usually, I mean, in Star Trek, the humans do it. The humans show up to other planets to just explore. But I'm not aware of a lot of examples where the aliens just kind of are here and they don't really need anything. And there's really no way to get rid of them. But that's also not really a problem because they're not really causing anything. It's usually they require something for us or something like that.
You are right, because it doesn't make a great story. It'd be like...
So that's my point. So again, the story falls apart. So we have to have these contrived stories. But I actually think of my story as a rebuke because I didn't want to come up for reasons why they might come to Earth. They're tourists. They're interested in biology. They think it's neat, right? They're teenage aliens out on a joyride with dad's spaceship, and they just came by Earth, even though it's in the quarantine zone and the galaxy police said you can't go to Earth, but they just did it to play a prank. Like that is a better reason than Independence Day, this blockbuster movie. I wanted a reason why they must come to Earth. And when you make a must, that actually becomes a lot harder because there's really nothing on Earth except like human biology that is unique in the universe. And, or you could say life, but then again, why do you have to come and like invade Earth and put spaceships above all of the buildings and stuff like that? I wanted a reason where they not only have to come to Earth, they must come, but they kind of have to deal with humanity.
And that's where the religious aspect comes into play.
That's precisely it. Because let's just take an example. Let's take counter examples to what I said. Okay, they want to come to Earth because let's say the galaxy is bereft of life, except for the aliens, of course. So they want to take samples. They want to watch us. They want to get some of our genetic biomes to store so that they can preserve us like we do with endangered species. Well, that doesn't mean drop a spaceship above Washington, D.C. and announce yourself. In fact, you probably stole some genetic samples 1 million years ago, and you maybe just, clandestinely collect DNA samples. Frankly, you could collect human DNA. And by the way, this was done during COVID. I knew a startup at MIT that was doing this. You can just put sensors in the sewer systems and you'll get enough human DNA that you can actually have a very wide genetic kind of sample without interacting with it. Do you think we're going to find the aliens taking sewer samples and bringing up to their ships? Like, not really. So, okay, it's a human biology. Is there any resource on Earth, material that is unique to planet Earth? No. There's no element on Earth that is unique to Earth. Every element in the periodic table that you could want is out in space, and it's not defended by Earthlings, and it's not at the bottom of a gravity well. So why religion? Well, as fanciful as it sounds, if you are a Catholic alien, you must come to Earth. There's nowhere else in the universe that you can go to mass. There's nowhere else in the universe that you can have all these things happen. Now, you might think that is a silly reason, but all of a sudden these aliens who could just ignore us as much as they want, even if they're studying us and watching us from afar, they're now forced to interact with humanity. And I think that creates some interesting conflict. And frankly, it's not been explored by the sci-fi canon. And that's the real sin right here, because someone should have written my book in the 1950s. I don't understand why it hadn't come out yet. And yet it took me in the 2020s to make it happen. So, and even if you believe the aliens are wrongly Catholic, they're silly to be Catholic. If they genuinely believed it, that's your reason right there. And that is the source of all sorts of conflict. Just like many people believe humans are wrong to believe in whatever religion they believe in, you couldn't reasonably argue as a human that religious motivations don't motivate other humans. I mean, that would be a very poor reading of the human condition and observer of the world as it currently stands.
No, you're right there. One of the biggest motivators in world history.
So why hasn't that motive been so replete in our alien kind of depictions in fiction? It kind of has. I mean, we do see it in some of the space operas where there's random, but there's reasons historically that the first writers of science fiction were extraordinarily hostile to Christianity. It's just a fact. So I think they kind of wrote this out they didn't want to entertain this premise, even if they come from the position that Christianity is totally, BS. They just didn't want to entertain it.
I could be wrong, but I think it's my understanding that God, not necessarily the Christian God, but just the figure of God does not have a place in a postmodern scientific world. It doesn't work as a reason why we are here, or the reason why things are the way they are. And I could be wrong, but and maybe that's why the religious aspect was so discarded when you're talking about back in the 50s, is because we've moved beyond God. Like, we don't need it. Science has done away with God and religion, and we're just moving forward.
Yeah. So Jose, that's what's, I think, super interesting about sci-fi and like how we find our place here in 2020. That was absolutely kind of the cultural understanding, and I'd say the intelligentsia's understanding in the mid 20th century. But that perspective sounds radically passé in the 21st century. I mean, you're getting all sorts of kind of intellectual thinkers kind of touching up against, if not Christianity, kind of theism, like theism vis-a-vis atheism, and all sorts of scientists. Now, like if you were to go to the Oxford faculty in 1950 and ask them, are they atheists? You would let me specify the faculty, the philosophers of religion, or even a lot of the physicists, they would all be like, absolutely, there's no such thing as God. If you were to do that today, the answer would be radically different.
But is that because the difference being that religion is there to offer people answers and comfort, whereas science doesn't necessarily provide comfort and answers? It actually poses more questions, because it's done away with our long-held beliefs for 2,000 years, if not more.
Well, I think a lot of that's the trope. Yeah. And I think that's been the trope my adult life and probably my parents' adult life. But as we round the corner into the 21st century now, that is kind of being regarded as a view that's a bit dated, to be honest. And I'll give you some authors that kind of discuss that. Like Ross Douthat just came out with the book. He writes for the New York Times, kind of like how a lot of science is kind of pointing in the direction of a creator. You have people like Elon Musk. I call it ersatz religion, the simulation theory. I came at MIT, I was deeply immersed in the techie world, like Silicon Valley techie. My startup out of MIT was that. And the amount of people who unironically speak about simulation theory, like constantly, without realizing that it's pretty much just like a substitute it's for people who think they're too smart or too sophisticated to say that they're religious, to talk in kind of religious terms. You have Stephen Meyer, he was on Joe Rogan recently, Stephen Meyer. So, I mean, I'm choosing names that have some kind of cultural purchase. I'm not trying to go to the corner of the library and just kind of like point it out. But I think a lot of people are kind of coming to the conclusion that this science versus religion kind of like dichotomy is a false dichotomy, and it's kind of uninteresting, especially in our fiction. And I think there's a lot of readers in sci-fi who are saying that they're kind of like, the metaphysical has been glaringly absent from our science fiction, and that doesn't make any sense. Even if you come down on the materialistic worldview of there is no such thing as God, like none of this matters. There's been such a hostility to not even write it into the stories, to kind of blatantly ignore it, that I think people are noticing the gap and they're interested in new stories. And that's kind of, again, someone should have written my book a lot earlier, but there has been this false dichotomy that I think had kind of a lot of purchase. Now, I'm not trying to persuade you to the contrary. I'm just kind of, I hope I'm representing that the conversation at least is changing, where it's less of science versus religion and it's more, they were never really enemies. And maybe we have to kind of update our understanding in religious terms. And maybe in the scientific world, we should be more humble about what science is actually claiming versus like the vibe of science. The vibe of science is against religion.
Yeah, well, I'm not an expert, right? I'm far from it.
That's what I'm here for.
But but I suppose that science does away with the Genesis creation of the world history. And I think maybe you're right in that, because religion brings to people a lot more things other than a reason why we are here. I think, our morals, our code of conduct, our sense of community, which are all necessary for humans. Religion does that. And when science, rules out, the God of the Genesis, if you discard everything else that comes from it, then that leaves a massive vacuum. And then people have realized that actually we need all these other things that religion brought along, other than there was a creator that blah, blah, blah. And I think maybe that's why we're coming back. And I think there is a slight resurgence in Christianity in the Western world. Well, particularly seems to be more of a US thing, to be honest, speaking from the other side of the Atlantic.
Yeah, I mean, we're the revolutionary country. We're kind of never in agreement, causing all sorts of trouble. But a lot of our kind of maelstrom of craziness does have a way of making its way across the Atlantic. So maybe I'm just a glimpse into the future kind of fissures that will be running through Spanish society. But I mean, I just have to, I don't want to be too pugilistic. So let me know if I'm going in the wrong direction. But like, again, at MIT, I'm kind of, I'm kind of technically kind of minded. I know I have the history degree, but I've got this weird kind of overlap. God of the Genesis. Yeah. Let's get rid of the specifics of the Genesis, but the person who came up with the Big Bang Theory was a Catholic priest. And it was called the Big Bang Theory as a pejorative, because the general consensus prior to the 1920s was that the universe was eternal. It was always here. It never needed to be created. The general consensus in cosmology today is that the universe began. And that is consistent with Genesis. That's not inconsistent with Genesis. Like, if we go to the top of the academies and say, okay, is the scientific record disproving of Christianity? Or sorry, not Christianity, but theism? The answer would be like, no, it's not inconsistent. That doesn't prove the Christian story is true. It doesn't mean it's true. It's just this idea that, like, listen, I'm a really brainy guy and I learned all of the science, so I can't believe in something called the Genesis. It's totally written out of the story. That was the view in the mid 20th century. That generally was the zeitgeist that you would feel inside the academy among some of the top intelligentsia. You're just not going to get that today. You wouldn't. You'd get a lot of people saying like, well, no, Genesis is not inconsistent because we believe that the reality did begin we don't really know how, and I don't know that I want to admit that that opens the door to God, but like it's not inconsistent. In fact, I would not look at you askance if you said you're a genuine Christian and a astrophysicist. I mean, I'm an astrophysicist who's not Christian, and that's cool too. But I wouldn't look at you like someone who believes triangles have four sides and just like pretend that that's an okay thought to have because it's so contradictory. But like, let you do you, man. Like, I think that is kind of like if you watch Rick and Morty is very much of the vibe that you're describing. There's science and then there's religion. But I just don't, I think that discussion is not really where we kind of are at the tip of the spear. And I just think that made for such an interesting, I think that's a historical reason why my story or one like it hasn't been written before. But that to me was just a huge opportunity. There was a hole in the market. Like that's basically what I did in business. There's this opportunity that the market has failed to address up till now. Well, why don't I address it? And I think it just makes for a really interesting conflict. You can read my book and think the aliens are either lying or stupid for believing what they believe. But you have to admit, if they showed up on planet Earth claiming to be Catholic, like all hell would break loose. That wouldn't be a happy ending. That's not I mean, maybe for a Sunday school teacher, she'd be like, the aliens showed up and they were Catholic and happily ever after. Well, that's not my book. My book is about, oh, that would not go well. This is my imagining of how this would unfold in a very messy and not good way.
So how long did it take you to write your book from inception to or conception to getting it out?
So the conception has been there since I was a child. Now, right. The conception was this was the conception. I was probably never told that Jesus is regarded is a historical figure, which is the historical consensus, by the way. That's, whether he rose from the dead is the area of debate, but whether a man named Jesus lived around the 1st century in Judea is one of the sure things we believe from history. And you can ask historians, but by the way, I was not exposed to that fact. And so some teacher must have been talking about it. And at the time I was really big into like Discovery Channel, Ancient Aliens, Unsolved Mysteries, the Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot. Like I was all about that stuff. And I was sure that aliens and the UFOs, which are clearly aliens watching Earth, they've been around for a while. You can see paintings where people are depicting UFOs from the Renaissance. So there's clearly been UFOs for a while. They've clearly been watching us. They could merely tell us what happened in 33 AD in Judea, in Roman, that Roman province. And frankly, it would just stop all of the arguing. They could just show us what occurred, and regardless of what the answer was, we would all be happily ever after. And so I had that thought as a kid, just as in when a teacher was trying to say like, hey, Jesus was a real human who did exist. My reaction was like, oh, the aliens can tell us about him. And then I went, with the rest of the 25, years past as me with that thought in my head. And I think in reaction to reading The Three Body Problem and kind of always wanting to express myself creatively, I kind of reimagined the thought, but now I'm an older person, been an atheist for a while, traveled around the world, saw all sorts of stuff, Jose, lived a very vibrant life. And I just started really playing that movie in my head. I'm like, okay, so aliens land, they announced they're Catholic, then what? And the more I imagined it, the more I'm like, oh man, that wouldn't go well. Unlike my childhood consideration. In fact, that would be probably one of the worst things that could have happened to humanity. And more than that, I think it would be extremely dramatic. I think there's a ton of drama mixed up in that story. And I started going, well, why hasn't anyone told me this before? It's a premise that doesn't seem like so far-fetched. No one else could have thought about it. And then I said, well, I guess since no one's told this story, I have to do it. And from the time I decided to do it till I finished the first draft was about 8 months. This is in 2021 during the, right in the middle of COVID. And then it took a while after that to get the book into publication form. Because as you know, from a lot of authors you speak to, the first draft is you can't look at it. It's, you need to exercise that demon. But it went through about 10 drafts to get to publication readiness.
Right. 10 drafts. And sorry, because the book is out through, is it Blue Castle?
Blue Castle Press. Yes.
Right. And is that,
that's my press.
Right. Okay. So yeah. Incidentally, now, so since we're hitting that point, where can people find your book?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a little more time if you're good, but
No,
the
no, I didn't mean as a finishing point. It's just that because we just got exactly there. So
yeah, so Amazon. So here's how I went about it. After having finished the book and doing a series of drafts such that I felt it was at a decent enough point, I wanted to go traditional, and
mhm.
I did go through the agenting process, so writing query letters, and I actually had decent success. I got a lot of full manuscript requests. But the interesting thing was they just thought that the subject matter was not appropriate. I had a really top agent in the sci-fi field go, I was reading your book and I was thought it was going to be a parody about Catholic aliens showing up. And you're taking this premise seriously. And that's just not for me. And I had others be like, the market doesn't want this. And I had all this market data to the contrary. Like,
Mm.
do you know there's all these weird groups online that are kind of running into each other that talk about both aliens and God like a lot. And even just people who are fans of sci-fi who are interested in a unique take on First Contact. Again, I came up with a premise that I think is unique in that it must explain why the aliens are coming. It's not why they might come here. There's that, but a lot of the agents didn't see it that way. So, like a lot of things, I said, I'm just going to kind of take this on my own. I've started companies before, so I can do this.
So
But I
do you?
wanted it to look traditional. Like I
Yeah.
wanted the same level of quality.
So do you think there is I don't know what's the word I'm looking for, a slight fear or apprehension, should I say, about putting out something that is very openly, um, you know, Christian in this case, or I don't know, like very openly leaning towards an idea,
I think the
or
apprehension
this is a
was
specific one, or this is a specific idea that you're putting forward.
yeah, I mean, when people say like, "Oh, can you mix Catholic in stories?" I said, "Well, Catholic stuff really sells." Da Vinci Code was a huge hit. I think in
Mhm.
large part because of the aesthetics of Catholicism. I mean, without a doubt. And like people like Conclave just came out, extremely blasphemous movie, but I mean, the visuals are beautiful. You've got the young pope, like people like there's a lot of Americans who travel to your country, Jose, just to look at those old churches who have no belief in God. I mean, you must see them, I'm sure,
Yeah, yeah,
wandering
yeah.
around. And not just from America. I was in China a lot. There's a lot of Chinese tourists who do the same thing. Like they have no cultural connection to that, historically speaking, and yet there they are.
Mm.
Um, and so yeah, this premise, yeah, the premise is provocative, but like I said, you don't have to be a believer to read my book at all. It's just if frankly, I have a ton, like I'd say most of my readers are not Christian or religious at all.
No,
And
so
the reason they're not is because they can read it and they're just as comfortable saying, like, oh yeah, Catholic alien sounds like a really bad day. Like that's interesting. I want to see that because that's the angle I'm coming from.
no, I was just wondering at your experience whether you encountered some adverse reaction from traditional publishers to putting something, out and out, openly Catholic, or whether there are some openly Catholic publishers out there. I don't know. Like, the US is a big place, so there's probably something for everyone out there. And maybe,
Well, yeah, to answer that directly, here's the deal with publishing. It's a very defensive and in not innovative industry.
uh,
Uh,
I I know that from talking to multiple, yeah,
so
agents.
there's so weirdly the whole thing is about what has been successful, like
Yeah,
the whole game. And then,
yeah,
every once in a while something new is done and then they all try to copy it and just do
yeah,
the same thing on copy and paste.
yeah.
And basically Christopher is a great example because Christopher just kind of bowled down that door with his story because his writing is so outrageously good. The voice of his story is just so amazing. But yeah, why agents didn't want to pick me to the extent that they gave me feedback and not just I'm an atheist and you're not just the whole book isn't just like a big takedown of Christianity. It's taking the premise seriously. In other words, the others were just like, yeah, no one's done something like this before, and no one wants to take a chance. And they said, like I said, well, how many sales would it be before it's no longer a chance. Like the numbers are so low, Jose. It's sad. It's like, well, if you sold a few thousand copies, it would prove that there's a market for this. And it's like, I've sold way more than a few thousand copies at this point. And all my reaction to as a businessman is like, oh, that's a sclerotic industry that's constantly getting in its own way and not being good at discovering creativity. Okay, well, I'm a business person. I'm an entrepreneur. I'll just go around that. And honestly, I like the control of being able to do it myself. I put money in ways that a publisher never would into the product, and it's paid off. It's been really great. So yeah, the reason the traditional publishers weren't, they might be there. They probably will be there in the future once, they become to realize how many sales I've been having. And the reason that they weren't there is because they couldn't see the future and that this is where the market was going. They play a very defensive game. So,
yeah, no,
that's how startups happen. The big guys take their eye off the ball.
That's right. And how did the connection with Christopher Rocchio come along? How did you two meet? Because it is quite nice to have a one-line recommendation by Christopher Rocchio in your book.
It's huge. It's especially for a debut novel. I mean, he is writing the classic in the making. I don't know if it's The Plant's Dune, but it'll be held up as like, I think in the year 2050 they're going to be like, oh well, you read Dune, you got to read The Sun Eater, his series. He's coming. I think he's just about to turn in his 7th.
Yeah, no, he finished it. It's just the first draft is finished.
Yeah, so we should maybe expect it later this year. I'm anxiously awaiting it. But how did I get in touch with him? So I just reached out to him. He is Catholic. Like my religious, just to put it on the table, is I was raised Catholic, fell away in my 20s, lived a very normal secular life, and sometime in my late 30s, came back to it for a variety of reasons. So anyways, I said, hey, I've got this in common. You're a sci-fi guy. I think you'll appreciate this premise. And he was very nice, happy to give the advice. But here was the clincher, Jose. This is how I got a blurb from him. This is the secret. I, as kind of with my businessman's hat on, am like, fewer and fewer people are reading. But yet when I walk out my door, I see everyone from the cop to the lady at the, checking me out at the supermarket, from construction workers to teachers to bankers to 13-year-old boys walking around with AirPods or headphones in of some kind or another. And everyone is listening to stuff all the time. And I haven't done a poll. I'm anxious to do this and just stop people and say, because I'm curious what percentage of that is music, like people just listening to music. I suspect it's a vanishingly small percentage, like maybe 5, maybe 10%. I think most people are listening to people talk at them, whether it's podcasts or audiobooks or things along those lines. So I'm seeing that there's fewer readers, fewer of my peers and friends read books, especially fiction. Yet people are consuming audio stuff at this increasing rate. And I'm just like, well, I need my book to be done in an audio way. And there are ways to do that, but I really wanted it to be next level audio. So I actually reached out to Jeff Hayes. I did this long odyssey of trying to figure out who's the best narrator out there? Is it like Tom Hanks? Is it just I mean, he's narrated stuff, but like, does it even have to be one of the classic narrators? I did reach out to CAA about hiring Tom Hanks to read for my book. The rates were not affordable, and he probably would have said no. Yeah. He's kind of expensive. So I went in, but by the way, I found this guy, Jeff Hayes, and Jeff Hayes did a book called Dungeon Crawler Carl. Have you heard of this at all?
No.
So there's this whole, it's worth knowing about it because this is going to be on it. Like everyone's going to be hearing about it. There's this subgenre called lit RPG, literature, role-playing games. It's not something I was familiar with, but there were all these Reddit posts about like best narrator. And they said, if Jeff Hayes was reading a user manual to a wash machine, I would listen to that. So I'm seeing this on repeat on Reddit. I'm like, well, whoever this Jeff Hayes fellow is sounds pretty good. I better listen to his stuff. And not his hit, but a book that he kind of did that became a huge audiobook, like going like bananas, is one called Dungeon Crawler Carl. It's in the lit RPG subgenre. In fact, Penguin Random House, it's sold enough in the series that Penguin Random House has gone back and they are republishing all of the books in the series in hardcover. And when I was talking about that top 50 list of sci-fi, it is launched to number 1 and 2. So that list that's like impossible to get into, Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Dinneman is there. But here's the crazy thing. Dungeon Crawler Carl, 75% of the sales are audiobook. 75%. And that's because Jeff Hayes, who's the narrator and the producer of the audiobook, did such an amazing job. He really has reimagined the medium of audiobooks. And why that's so cool is like audiobooks kind of come from a reading aid for the deaf. Like it's not real.
Yeah.
They kind of was like, try not to get in the way and perform the story. Jeff Hayes kind of just threw that out. The first films were also like, here, we can record theater. Let's do that. But then people realize film is its own medium. You do you do unique things to film on it. I think we're just starting to realize that with audiobooks. And so Jeff did that. And that's a large reason why I think Dungeon Crawler Carl is, I mean, it's a hit. It's probably going to be turned into a TV show. Expect to see it on like HBO or Apple TV or one of those streaming services in the next few years. But I'm like, that guy is the guy that needs to do my book. Now, my book is not lit RPG, and I'm a debut author, but I basically was just reached out to Jeff. I was like, Jeff, listen, man, what do we need to do to make this happen? I want to work with you. I'll pay you whatever you want. Tom Hanks said no, but you're number two. And he agreed. And he's like, but I got to read the book first. So he read it and he's like, I love it. Like, and he's not religious or anything. He's just like, dude, Catholic aliens played straight. Like, I've never seen anything like that. I need to do this. I go, how much do you want? He said, well, you can pay me on the back end. I'm going to take this project on because I have faith in it. So the reason that connects to Christopher Rocchio is Jeff Hayes did the audiobook of my book. And it's just, I mean, I think it's just a masterpiece unto its own. That's the one I recommend. But Christopher's busy writing this kind of this epic in the making, this amazing series that is up there with Dune and will honestly be considered in the same category. And he didn't have time to read my manuscript, even though it's a normal sized novel. It's not like a bookstore stopper, but I had the audio to give him. And just like a lot of people don't read, they do have spare time. So I sent him Jeff Hayes audio, and that was really the key to getting a blurb from Christopher Rocchio.
Oh.
So he was nice. He reached out to me, but I honestly, to all my authors friends out there, I would recommend that put some deliberate thought into the audio aspect of the book. Return on investment's harder to calculate in this day and age, but honestly, it's the medium that book will very likely be experienced in by most people.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because a few weeks ago, I got approached by hopefully guest of the show next week, Justin Rose, where he'd done a whole production. It was an audio production with original music, different actors. So instead of just writing a book and narrating it, it's more like a theater production in 11 chapters, different scenes. And the conception from the beginning was audio. My only issue is that, I don't know, for whatever the reason, audio doesn't quite work for me.
Sure.
I don't know. Maybe I'm too old school. I just need the page and the attention. I find audio, it can be a bit disposable, or your mind can wander if you're doing something else.
Definitely.
Whereas,
and I think it's important as an author to have, this is what Brandon Sanderson would say. He'd say, have your book in every format. So like mine is ebook, paperback, hardback, audio. Every reader is going to have their own preferences. And you're right. I think a lot of people that don't do audio, that's the reason, because they tend to multitask. Like podcasts are fine because I'm multitasking. I can miss things, but for a book, I want to experience it.
Yeah.
And then there's a style thing. Like there's reading aid for the blind. Sorry, I might have said deaf before, but it's reading aid for the blind. Here, I will read the book to you, and I will try to take myself away from it so you can experience the story in a neutral way, like as if you were reading it, and you can imagine fill in all the blanks in your mind. To the other end of the spectrum, being like an audio drama, like a radio play, something like that. What Jeff does, which is really cool, is he sits right somewhere in between. So it's very much still an audiobook, but with some sound effects and some immersiveness, definitely acting out the like dialogue as opposed to just reading the dialogue. And so a lot of people walk away, and I think he found the happy medium. Some people want to produce audio dramas. They prefer those. Great. There's always going to be a market for that. But I think he's going to set the tone as what people come to expect out of an audiobook going forward. Just like a little more immersive than just a talking voice that reads the text. But yeah, even with that, I think there's still going to be people who prefer to read. And as an author, you're really well positioned to accommodate everybody. I think that's the best way to approach it. But I think we've neglected audio, and I think we need to do more on the.
Yeah, but then we upping the entry costs
True.
to publishing, isn't it, or self-publishing? If now the expectation is that you're going to have your physical book, your ebook, the audiobook, and the audiobook incidentally with a certain level of production. I'm not necessarily talking like the Fall of Ingwe with an original score and a cast of 8 different actors, but
Yep.
that sort of thing. It's a
I
lot of
hear you.
money up. It's a lot of money up front for something that people do in their spare time.
Well, you could say the same about podcasting, right? I mean, if we took a time machine to 10 years ago, Jose, you said you've been doing this 4 years. So 2015, you'd get a lot more people with, like I even some of the more produced shows of 2015, uh, if they had video at all, which a lot didn't, they, might have been using AirPods or the equivalent, like just normal microphones. And you and I are both sitting here with proper microphones. There are basically podcasts produced at TV level quality now. In a sense, you could say that podcasting is a more expensive game to get into than it used to be. In some sense, I mean, maybe there's some debating there, but just like any podcaster can just pull out their phone and start talking into it, or you could splurge on a set and all sorts of great sound equipment and start there. I think writing is kind of the same thing. It comes down to your goals. Like I said earlier, come from business. I like the scoreboard. I like the sales. I like readers. If you want to write a book with your time and get to readers and that fulfills you, I mean, there are way more antisocial hobbies than people writing stories. I think we'd be
Yeah.
in a better world if that's how people chose to get their rocks off. But you know, I think as an author, you just have to do some soul searching. I think it helps you if you want to make more of an impact and have more sales to consider your audio product. I will be proven wrong in some cases. And in some cases, some people will say, yeah, thanks, MR Leonard. I'm okay doing what I'm doing. But just writing it off as like untrue to the medium or like back in the day, you didn't have to do that. So I'm going to ignore it now. It just seems like kind of motivated reasoning, in my opinion.
No, that's interesting. It's an interesting point because I don't know. I've always been asking people, and it's something that um, I don't know. I'm still on the fence because a lot of people say you don't really need to have a big social media presence in order to support your work. Other people seem to be exactly in the opposite camp that you most definitely need some social media presence to support your work. We can talk about that, but now you're talking about the different versions of your book, the ebook, the audio. That's a new spin that I hadn't talked to people before. And for you, and I think you make a very interesting point that the audio consumption, even though it's not for me, I can see this being on the uprise. I think
Yeah.
more and more people will be doing that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
but
where I think a lot of these repressed creatives come from. You're right to notice all of like the barriers to entry. Like, okay, I'm going to write a book. That sounds like climbing Mount Everest. I'm going to open up Microsoft Word and write something that could be considered a book. I mean, I know people. I have very smart friends who couldn't write essays in college. I mean, that blank white page on Microsoft
mm,
Word was pretty much like they'd rather jump out of an airplane, honestly. And yet they had to do it. And so just writing the story, like you will write in this program and it will be coherent. It can't just be you slapping the keyboard. That is daunting. And then that's not to say anything else that you just said. And then you should also do some social media. You should probably think about the different formats. Have you thought about audio? Oh, how about traditional versus self? How are you going to market? Like this stays a lot of people from even writing the first word.
well,
And I don't blame them.
I've mentioned before in the podcast, I gave up on that. Before my reincarnation as a parent, I used to write. I perpetrated a couple of novels and a few short story collections. But when it came to the whole marketing, publishing, trying to get it all done, it was like, nah, I can't. I couldn't give it the time. I was living in the UK, but writing in Spanish, and things weren't back in 2014. Things were not what they are in 2025, believe it or not. So I gave up on trying to make that final step into trying to get published because, yeah, it's too many things and the costs and everything involved with it.
Yeah, it's a second. There's writing the book and then there's selling the book, and they're two totally different subject matters, two different things you have to focus on. It's crazy. And coming from a non-publishing or writing background, it's been really eye-opening to kind of have to jump in that direction. But my business background was kind of like get smart on new industries quickly. I mean, like as you can imagine, for China consulting, there's a different business all the time that needs us to help them get into China. Like I'd love to say we just worked on manufacturers who focused on CNC kind of construction. It's like, no, like if you would go out of business, there aren't enough of those. But if you do like finance company, a pet food company, all this stuff. So I've always kind of enjoyed kind of going up the learning curve on certain things, but it is there. Like there should be no illusions. This whole writing the book and then selling it are two different things, and you'll have to do both as an author. And that's not most people's cup of tea. And frankly, I would love, I think it's cool that, do the podcast, talking to people. Like this is really interesting too. You get to hear about new books, talk to crazy Bostonians with hot takes about science fiction and first contact stories. I mean, I love that too.
No, but I can appreciate. I understand some authors' frustration that they may have written the best book of books that they can do, but it's just not in them to do the other thing. It's just not maybe in their portfolio of skills. And I can sense the frustration that, I've got this great book, but I can't seem to get it out there. And once again, it's just not enough to, go to Amazon Direct Publishing, create the Kindle file and put it up there, because thousands of people are doing that. So once again,
you get lost. Yeah, absolutely. One way to do it is to have a great cover. And I just want to give a shout out to my designers. They're actually a group of Spanish guys. So the Spanish connection to my book is quite strong. A company called Cover Kitchen. And, I think they did it. Did you happen to take a look at the cover of my book? I've gotten a lot of compliments about the cover.
I think I have, because when I was looking at your press kit, is that the one with the St. Peter Square and the... Yeah. So, it's like small things like that help you get noticed. And, if you can get a Spanish cover designer and typesetter and a podcast host, like you're in good shape, people. This is the beginning. That's the trifecta for selling books. I promise you. I don't know, because I've got another channel in Spanish, YouTube, and it's actually gained a lot more traction than this one. However, getting people to have these kind of conversations in Spain is proving nigh on impossible. And it's just weird. So like Christopher's books are finally being published in Spanish later this year.
Oh, great.
So I thought, hey, I'll reach out to the Spanish publisher. Hey, I'm so-and-so, got a channel, over 1,000 subscribers. I've interviewed Christopher and his editor. Could we get you on my channel to just give a bit more publicity and talk about Sanita in Spanish? No reply, nothing. And it's like, so I can email Christopher any second now and talk to him about his books or whatever. I can talk to David Bala buying books. I cannot get the Spanish publisher to even reply to a message to say, we don't want to talk to you. And it's happened with other creators as well and stuff. It's different culture. I'm struggling with the difference. Yeah.
Do you have any insight into that as a Spaniard yourself, or?
I don't. I mean, I spent half my life outside of Spain, particularly my adult life.
You got anglicized, huh?
It's funny because like now I'm kind of doing two versions of the same video. If I do a book review, I'll record it in English and I'll record it in Spanish. And I can guarantee you, in Spanish, I get way more engagement with views, with comments, with likes, with people than in English. However, in English, I'm getting people like you requesting to be on the show. Could you please read my book? Could you do a review? If I reach out to authors, they're happy to talk to me. Exactly the opposite in Spanish. It's almost like polar opposites. And I'm trying to figure out why.
Huh. Yeah, there's this huge bias on the internet in favor of the English language. Unfortunately, it's kind of like eating the world in terms of content. I don't know that that's an explanation, though. I have no idea, but it's fascinating, and I'm glad I can.
even from Spanish creators, it's like, hey, I'm offering you, I've got, over 1,000 subscribers, just get a bit more exposure. It's free publicity, like for Christopher, for his publisher, get the publisher, sit down with me for half an hour, 45 minutes. It's free publicity.
Yeah.
I started drumming, the jungle drums of Sanita in Spanish, before I knew the books were coming out. I was like, hey, this is the next big name in sci-fi fantasy. And then it was through the comments that I learned that the books were being published. And then I was like, oh, Christopher, you told me 2 weeks ago that they were not going to be published. I said, oh, no, they are now. So all of that, but yeah. No.
That's wild. As a businessman, to me, I feel offended. I feel these Spanish publishers need to kick up their marketing game. But yeah, because I wouldn't leave that line around myself. That's wild, Jose. I'm really glad you told me that, because it's going to give me something to think about. That's really fascinating, the different cultural aspects to kind of this desire to market and throw it out there and just get on the internet and talk.
And I think there's definitely an appetite here, and there's definitely a market for all these stories. All these books. You go into any bookstore here, you see, Sanderson, Sarah J. Maas, all these big sellers. They are there, and there's a demand for them. But I don't know. Maybe the national psyche is a little bit different.
It's the opportunity. You see the holes in the market. I saw mine in a type of sci-fi story that wasn't being told, and you maybe this is your big break. I don't know. You could be the guy who does this.
But also because it's not just Spain. Because of the language, like half my audience comes from Latin
America.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So got people from Ecuador, Mexico, you name it. So there is a demand for this. And people are asking me in the other channel, hey, we want more conversations. I was like, I'm trying, but nobody wants.
Well, I'll send as many your way as I can, that because I do have some friends in LATAM, and if they might be of any use, I'm going to definitely mention you first. But Jose, I do have to run right now.
No,
do you mind if I plug the book? If I shill it as the businessman?
No, by all means, go for it.
It's Pilgrims by M.R. Leonard. So if you go to Amazon, you can find it. It's sold at all. It's a Kindle Unlimited, so the ebook will be exclusive to Amazon, and it is an Audible exclusive. So if you have an Audible subscription, you can get it. That's Pilgrims by M.R. Leonard. The narrator is Jeff Hayes. But the paperback and hardcover are sold wherever books are sold. So you can buy that at your favorite book retailer, buy it at your local bookshop. Actually, they would love the business. They'd rather get paid than Amazon. So yeah, you can find it anywhere. Pilgrims, M.R. Leonard on Amazon is usually the easiest place. And my website is mrleonard, author.com, and Leonard is Leonard, and that includes links to all my socials and places to buy the book. So that's the story. Find out what all the people are talking about. These Catholic aliens, what could that even be going on there? Well, I promise you, if you read it, you're going to enjoy it, and you're going to have a strong reaction, but most of the people have been very positive. But if you hate it too, I love to talk to those people. I love to talk to people who it's a provocative premise, and it's meant to inspire conversation, and in any direction is okay.
That's a great attitude to have. I think Christopher said, you get more out of the 1-star reviews than you get out of the 5-star reviews. So
absolutely. The 1-star, the worst review is a 3-star with like 2 words. You're just going like, come on, say more, hate me more, love me more. But like indifference is the worst feeling of all. But
that's right.
Jose, I really appreciate you having me on. This has been a really fun conversation for me. I hope so for you. And I really enjoyed getting to know you. I'll let Christopher just had a new baby, so I'm trying to give him some space. But when I do talk to him, I'll say, hey, Christopher, we both had the honor of being on the Great Amazing Worlds with Jose. And
don't know about honor, but
deeply honored. I'm going to be telling everyone in Boston about it all day today. You might be going to bed. I'm going to be running down the streets talking about it. But anyways, Jose, I really appreciate it. Thanks so much. And I hope to talk to you again soon.
Yeah, take care. Thank you very much for coming here. Everyone, Stephen in the chat has been watching the whole time, and anyone later home, thank you very much for popping in. Everyone, take lots of care, and we'll see you soon.
Take care.